All right, I have 10:30 by my clock here. Both we're all ready to go ahead and get started. I'd like to call the Station Resource Committee meeting to order. Although now I'm looking down there, I see that I've now lost Janice and Supervisor Perez. Do we need a quorum to get the motion started or get the presentation started?
We can start the presentations. Anything that would require action, we would need a quorum.
Yeah,
but they're all information.
Which we don't have any action items. So,
yeah,
all right. With that, let's go ahead and start item number 1, the proposed rules 1110.2.
Good morning.
Michael, this is yours.
Sorry, yes, before Michael starts, this is Jill Wynett. I just want to let you know that we have 2 speaker cards for item number 1 and about 20 speaker cards for item number 3 at this time.
Very good.
Good morning. I'll be presenting on Rule 1110.2 and Rule 1100. Rule 1110.2 is our landing rule for engines. Not only does it facilitate our transition from reclaim to command and control rules, it also will help implement our control measure CMB05. Our Rule 1100 is our implementation schedule for facilities that are exiting reclaim. As part of this effort, we go through a BART assessment to establish what the NOx limits should be. This assessment looks at existing equipment outside of the air district, what technologies are available and what's coming up in the near future. We propose an interim or an initial limit. We do a cost effectiveness analysis, and then we come up with the NOx emission limit for the rule. For this particular rule, what we're saying is that the emission limit should remain at 11 ppm, which is the current limit in the rule. The reclaim facilities will be required to meet this limit. We are adding an option for facilities that have SEMS to have 1 hour averaging, and there will be no changes to the VOC and CO limits because whether they're in reclaim or in non-reclaim facility, they're already meeting those limits. The implementation schedule is December 31st, 2023 to meet those limits, but we are providing additional time for compressor gas lean burn engines. That's to accommodate their unique operations, and we're also including additional time to allow facility modernization where they have the opportunity to switch to some zero emission technology. Some other proposed amendments that we're looking at, as the facilities are transitioning out of reclaim, they will be required to meet the monitoring requirements in 1110.2. That will require that some engines that did not previously have a SEMS will be required to install them, and it does have an impact on the cost, which I'll talk about in a slide or two. We are also putting in reporting and record keeping requirements, and there's some additional revisions, but I did want to highlight one in particular. For offshore crane engines, we've been working with the facility to establish appropriate NOx limits for that particular category. We are asking for them to provide us source test information that will help us to decide what the appropriate limit should be, and we're asking for cooperation from that facility to actually provide that type of information for us. The proposal will impact roughly 70 or so engines. Many of the rich burn engines only have to do some minor changes and then implement or put in SEMS equipment. For the lean burn engines, these are generally engines that will have to do some more substantial changes, but there are considerable emission reductions that will be associated with that. For this rule, and I'm on slide 7 now, The lean burn engines, the cost effectiveness ranges between around $30,000 up to about $35,000, and will be. And then for the rich burn, there is a higher cost effectiveness, and that's because there aren't a lot of emission reductions that are associated with that, but there is a cost for putting in the SEMS, and so it's a monitoring cost, and it's something basically that we need to have to ensure that the equipment is running properly. Overall, the rule will have emission reductions of about 0.3 of a ton per year of NOx. Per day, excuse me, thank you. So we do have a remaining key issue. We were approached in August with a new technology that is a linear generator, and they asked that we recognize the equipment in our rule, and we're certainly open to that. But they did come back and ask for us to look at our distributed generator emission limits. And just to give you a little bit of background on those limits, they were instituted back in 2000. The state adopted limits in 2003. And basically the idea behind that is that any equipment that would be providing power would meet the same type of standard that, say, a turbine would, so that whatever technology was being put in place to provide energy would basically all compete on a level playing field. And so with this request, they asked us to look at this standard and take out, currently there's a pounds per megawatt per hour standard, and it does sort of have a penalty for low load operations. So we were willing to go ahead and translate that into a ppm level. But when we did that, they came back to us and said, well, the VOC that our equipment can meet, our VOC can't meet that standard. And so they've asked us to relook at that standard, and we're very reluctant to change that standard. Our limits are technology neutral, and they've been met by a number of different types of pieces of equipment. And when people come in to decide whether or not they want to enter the market, they understand that they need to meet the VOC, NOx, and CO limits that we have currently in the rule. And again, very reluctant to loosen those limits for some new technology that's coming in. There is another ask that they had from us, which is to look at how we do the testing for that. And we feel that it is important that we assure ongoing compliance through weekly testing, and so that we don't feel that we'll be able to provide that flexibility either. Our rule is going to the board in November for a public hearing, and that concludes my presentation.
Very good. I think we'll go ahead and take comment first. Jill, did I hear you right? We have 20 commenters on item number 3.
Yes, sir.
So hearing that, I just want to let everybody know we're probably going to go down to 1 minute per comment, just because we do have a time schedule. We need to make sure we are out before technology committee. So with that, we'll go ahead and set the timer to 1 minute. And my apologies to those that hopefully, if I can get it into 1 minute, just be swift, and we'll do the best we can. All right. So go ahead and let's call those first 3 or first 2. Jill?
We have 2 on this item. The first is Dan McGivney and then Adam Simpson.
Good morning. My name is Dan McGivney with SoCal Gas. Hopefully I can be real brief here. I just wanted to first thank Susan Nakamura and her staff. They've worked really well with us over the last year and a half. We've made a lot of progress, and I think we're pretty much getting there. We do have 2 items that we still want to discuss further with staff based on information they provided us yesterday. So, but I think we feel we can get those resolved in the next couple of weeks or so. So again, thank you very much. I also want to quickly address the linear generator. It's a new technology. It's not a technology was considered when 1110.2 was adopted many years ago or during the amendments since then, what typically regulates a traditional engine that most of you can picture in your mind. This is a new technology. It can play a significant role in the use of microgrids and stuff like that. So I think we should give it some consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
And then Adam Simpson, please.
Hi, Adam Simpson, co-founder of AdaGen and head of product. Linear generators is a new category of power generation. It's not like anything considered by the district under this engine rule or anything considered under Rule 1134 for turbines. Our products provide high efficiency, low emissions, dispatchable, load following on-site electricity for commercial customers using natural gas, biogas, or hydrogen. Our linear generators have 2 moving parts, no oil, no spark plugs, no rotating parts, no rotating shaft attached to a generator, and in fact, no mechanical work at all. They operate using a low temperature reaction of air and fuel without burning, which is how we achieve our low emissions. Given the unique attributes of our technology, including high efficiency, low CO2 emissions, low NOx without an SCR, and load following and dispatchability for renewables integration, we'd appreciate the board and staff's continued support to work on a separate class and category.
Can you tell us why the VOC issue is the one issue where you guys stand out? I mean, obviously there's always something, right? But can you tell us or explain to us how far out of that you are?
We're continuing testing, and we hope to be very close. But given that we're new technology coming to market, we'd like to take into account our actual technology and how it works. Because we're 50% more efficient than any engine or turbine out there at our scale, our exhaust is much cooler, and oxidation catalysts prefer it to be hotter to oxidize propane, which is a VOC, and we're working on catalyst mixtures to react that propane at our low temperatures. So it's a fundamental aspect of being more efficient while having extremely low NOx without after treatment.
And when do you think you might have some progress on that, or as far as different media or other things like that?
I think it's going to be a continued effort. We're using the most expensive catalyst we can buy today, and we're starting an R&D effort with a top manufacturer. So it's going to be a sliding scale.
Uh-oh.
And any other public comments on this item here? No other public comments on this item.
Sorry, my video disconnected there for a second, but thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Board members, comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor?
We're supposed to be encouraging this kind of creative new technology. We want to have people out there pushing the envelope and trying new things. And so I would want us to provide room for them to continue to explore this option. So I would ask our staff to create a new category for the linear generator and not have it included in part of an October set hearing or move the set hearing back to give us room to continue work on this.
I would like to say I feel similarly. My other colleagues have any comments?
I'll comment on that, Chair. If we go ahead with that, it would mean increased VOC emissions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct?
That's correct.
Well,
And how will that impact our ability to meet the federal standards?
Mayor, I think that would depend how widespread this technology is used. There's no way to predict that at this point.
right now, my understanding is they do not have one in the district yet, right?
They do not.
Right.
No.
So does staff feel that we'll have time between now and when they might have one, that we could work towards that and hopefully have our standards in place by then, and hopefully they'll maybe have their media corrected by then? I mean, do we feel like we can come to some compromise between now and then, as opposed to trying to shove them down the same path as everybody else? And
I think we can continue to work with them on the current schedule. I'm reluctant to delay this rule for this one particular technology. We need to move forward with the other landing rules, but we can continue to work with them to potentially find a solution.
well, is one of those solutions potentially putting together a new rule for this type of engine so that we're not having to delay this rule because of it?
Well, we feel for any new technology, it needs to fall into one of our rules, or essentially it would have, unlimited emissions, and we're required to regulate those emissions. So there might be a way to have some kind of interim consideration in this rule, and then later on work on something more specific. But again, we have to work through some of the information they've provided.
And what would that interim language look like?
We'd have to, like Mr. Morris mentioned, it's right now in 1110.2 for electricity generation. It's essentially technology neutral. It just sets emission limits based on efficiency, and now we're adding basically a stack standard in ppm, which provides a little more flexibility. But in order to do something different for this technology, we'd still have to explore what that would look like. I think we need to look at the other potential benefits of this technology to see if it outweighs the potential VOC increase on different scales.
I agree.
And Dr. Fine, you're saying you think you can do that by October?
I'm hopeful.
You're more of an optimist than I would have thought.
Well, Dr. Fine, if we can't do that by October, my thought would be that we need to look at how else we can handle this, because I do want to encourage new technology, and I do want to see some, a brief on what this technology means as far as if it is far more efficient in all the other categories except for VOC, what that truly means. And so we have a better understanding of that. I think the board needs to be able to see that. And so I'm asking that we get some more information back to our committee members here. And then also obviously to the board, so that we can have a better understanding of what truly this means as far as comparisons to other technologies.
I think we can, and even if we have a little more time than October, if there's minor changes between the October 30-day package and the hearing, they can still be made in that period. We'd have to make sure that they were minor changes, but I think there's a path forward to still make November, but we'll potentially come back and let the committee know.
Okay, and if it looks like that we're not going to be able to put this into this rule, I would again suggest, rather than us having to come to the board meeting and have an upset at the board meeting, I'd rather get this taken care of, beforehand. So if we can't, then let's talk about maybe some other options.
So Mayor Benoit, yes, thank you. So when we try to encourage new technologies, we try to encourage those technologies across the emission spectrum. We encourage those technologies which are, for instance, at zero emissions. We encourage those technologies which get us the emission reductions and don't necessarily add to one and decrease in another. So in this particular aspect, I want to make sure that if we're encouraging the technology, that we're doing it in a way that's consistent with the widespread decrease in emissions across the board. So in this particular case, I understand what the committee is asking of us, and that's to provide additional information in how we move forward. I guess the question that I have is, how many units are we looking at within the very short time? Because there's some experimental things that I think that we could be doing under an experimental R&D type permit while we actually work forward on either a separate rule like a 0.1 or a 0.2. So I'm looking at staff to see if that's an option, or if we know what type of numbers we're looking at with this kind of engine in the short term.
We are at this current time, we only have about one application that they've received from Etogen with regards to installation of one of their units at the district.
And so if there's only one permit that's been requested, I think that gives us some latitude and time to continue to work forward with them. I think on this particular aspect, as you were saying, Mr. Chairman, we can go forward with the rule. We can go forward and commit to work with this company, but I want to make sure that we work in a way that we're getting emission reductions across all of the pollutants.
Very good. I think that gets us enough to where we can move forward today, and hopefully that we can find some progress and find a way forward. Supervisor, you have a comment? Or sorry, Senator Delgado?
Oh, I just wanted to let everybody know that I've joined the meeting. Sorry that I was
Welcome.
late.
No problem. All right. Unless there's any other comments, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item, item number 2, the summary proposed rule 1407.
Thank you. I'm going to try and be brief on this. I don't think we have any speakers at this point, and I understand that there's plenty of other people that are here for the next item. So this is in regards to our proposed amended Rule 1407. The rule basically implements our airborne toxic control measure. It regulates arsenic, cadmium, and nickel from metal melting operations, specifically non-ferrous metal melting operations, which include aluminum, brass, and bronze alloys. As part of this rule development, we're expanding the applicability of the rule to include carbon steel, so it'll no longer be non-ferrous, it'll be non-chromium metals. In the future, we plan to regulate chromium metals through our Rule 1407.1. But the provisions in this rule basically mirror or simulate a lot of the regulations that we've had in our lead series rule, our 1420 series rules. We have emission control requirements that regulate the point sources, and we provide flexibility by allowing them to either choose a reduction through a control device or to demonstrate that they have extremely low emissions as noted by a mass emission standard. We also include source testing and parametric monitoring to make sure that the equipment is operating properly. We include provisions that regulate fugitive emissions, basically building enclosure to minimize cross drafts and enhance housekeeping, including alternative provisions where necessary. One of the efforts that we really focused on was limiting the exemptions that were in the current rule. So we basically require that any type of material that's going to be used in the process have very low cadmium and arsenic content, and that we have a throughput that eventually can't be passed by if you're going to utilize the exemptions. We do have it on a sliding scale so that if facilities can demonstrate that they have even cleaner metals, that they can produce more under this particular exemption. There are approximately 60 facilities impacted by this rule, and for the smaller facilities, they will have very minimal costs, but there are pretty substantial costs to the larger facilities. And this is a conservative estimate because we're assuming that they're not going to take advantage of utilizing the provisions that allow them to only use cleaner metals. So we were conservative in that way. One of the things that I would like to direct your attention to is the total cost. That's a total cost over 21 years. And as you know, in the next slide, we do that because our stakeholders had requested that we include total costs as part of this process. So as I mentioned, the remaining key issue, if you'd like to call that, is that our stakeholders did want us to note that there is a total cost that's involved that they have to pay up front. And we do note that it's basically about $5 to $6 million that we believe that they'll have to pay the first year. And that's, of course, if they don't take advantage of this incentive that we built into the rule to utilize cleaner metals in the first place. And with that, we're going to the public hearing in 2 weeks. This was delayed from the July stationary source, and that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Any board member comments on this item?
I have a few questions. On the slide, there were the 4 large facilities, and their cost for implementation was $575,000. Can you tell me where those 4 are located?
One of them is located in LA County, and I believe the other, no, I'm sorry, 2 are in LA County and 2 are in San Bernardino County.
Okay.
Did you need more specifics than that?
Yes, that would be great too.
So I believe one's in Azusa, the other is in Vernon, and Ontario and Rancho Cucamonga, I believe.
Okay. You mentioned that if the facilities use different types of metals, different inputs, then they could, that would satisfy some of this. Have you talked about those with the facilities? Are there alternatives? What are their reasons for not using those now?
Well, so right now, the way that the exemption works is that they don't have to worry about what contaminants are in their scrap metals that they might bring in. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to take as part of, look at as part of this rule development. And a lot of the facilities, I believe, feel like they can look at their incoming process stream and minimize the contaminants that will be coming in. And again, this is a conservative estimate where we're assuming that they won't do that. But I have a feeling, and the reason why I think there's not a lot of people here to comment on that is that they do feel like they can do that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. Any other speakers? Are there any other speakers? If not, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item. No public speakers on this item?
No, sir.
All right. We'll go to item 1403 for the asbestos rule.
Good morning, Chair Benoit, members of the committee. Excuse me. So I'm going to give an update on where we are on proposed amended Rule 1403, which regulates asbestos emissions from demolition and renovation activities. Just some quick background on asbestos. EPA has identified it as a hazardous pollutant back in 1971. At that time, EPA established federal regulations, we call them the NESHAP regulations, to minimize exposure from asbestos fibers that might occur during demolition and renovation activities. The NESHAP forms the floor. We have to be at least as stringent as the NESHAP. We have our own version of these regulations, which is Rule 1403. We originally adopted them in 1989. They've been amended several times since that point. The last time was amended back in 2007, so it's been quite a while. One point I do want to make here is our rules are more stringent than the NESHAP, that they always have been, and that's by design, as we recognize, given the dense urban population that we have in our area, a higher chance of asbestos exposure. So some of the health risks from asbestos, a lot of lung diseases, asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma, other forms of cancer as well. We are still seeing an increase in deaths from asbestos exposure, even though occupational exposure of asbestos has gone down over the years. And part of that is because symptoms take a lot of years to manifest once you've been exposed. But in general, the greater the risk or the greater exposure you have to asbestos, the greater your chances are of developing health effects. Some of the materials that contain asbestos, there's a lot of building materials, which is why we have this rule that's focused on renovation and demolition activities. So drywall joint compound, for example, can contain asbestos. All these other substances can also contain asbestos. The U.S. is the only industrialized country in the world that has failed to enact a ban on asbestos. So even though it shouldn't be happening or occurring in newer materials, there is a possibility that it can be in those materials, and so that's why we have to treat these types of materials as suspected asbestos containing. And then there's different types of asbestos. So I'm talking about friable and non-friable asbestos. The friable asbestos is the stuff that can be crumbled easier. It, the fibers can be released easier, so it typically has more risks associated with it. So these would be things like insulation, fireproofing, those kinds of fluffy, non-rigid materials. Non-friable asbestos containing materials are more rigid. So these are things like cement pipe, roofing shingles, tiles, etc. Non-friable asbestos, because it's rigid, the asbestos is contained within the matrix, there's less chance of exposure. But non-friable asbestos materials can be made friable when they're crumbled, if they're, if there's drilling involved, cutting, etc. And so we then treat them as potentially having a risk of exposure. So key components of Rule 1403, there's three different elements. First is the surveying requirements. You want to always start with a survey. That is also a requirement in the NESHAP, and that's really to go and identify the scope of asbestos-containing materials, as well as to assess the condition of those materials. So identifying that they're asbestos, are they intact, are they damaged, are they disturbed, what kind of situation do you have? Once you've surveyed and you've assessed that there's asbestos and what its condition is, then you notify. Notification is also an element under the NESHAP. There's a minimum 10-day notification that comes to the district, and that's really to give us a chance to be able to review the plans, to be able to go inspect, make sure that the job is being addressed and cleaned up appropriately. There are exemptions on the notification requirement for emergencies. In the case of an emergency, you don't want to have to wait 10 days before you start the work. So there are some provisions both in the NESHAP and in our language. And in our proposed amendments, we are looking at a number of changes to that emergency language to make that more workable and practical for folks. And then the third element is the treatment and removal. So these are work practices to treat asbestos, to make sure that when those activities are happening, the asbestos fiber exposure is minimized, and then also handling and disposal requirements for asbestos. One thing, just real quick before I move on, just when we talk about asbestos materials, it is really specific to renovation and demolition activities. So you have to be in the process of demolishing a building, making some changes within that building, or components of that building in order for this rule to comply. So our objective in revising this rule, we wanted to be able to go in and clarify existing rule requirements. We had heard over the years through our compliance and enforcement folks that there was a lot of confusion about specific rule elements. We also wanted to make sure that where there were essential elements of the federal NESHAP, that our rule was comported with that, and then also make those changes as necessary. We've been working on this rule for a while. We've been working on it since spring of 2018. We've had multiple versions of our rule language that we vetted with stakeholders since that time. We've had 7 working group meetings. We were originally coming to the board in early 2019 with a proposed rule. At that time, we heard a lot of comments from stakeholders regarding the emergency language that we had changed, as well as some other issues. And so at that time, we decided to delay this rule, to take the time to work more with our stakeholders and address their concerns. So a number of issues are being addressed in this proposed rulemaking. Some of them are clarifications. As I mentioned, some of them are additions to the rule where we've changed language specific to emergency notifications and providing some additional flexibilities for underground pipe. In general, this rule does not add any new requirements. The proposed amendments really are a relaxation in some places where we feel it makes sense to be able to provide some practical ways for addressing emergency situations and situations where perhaps the risk is not as great for asbestos exposure. So I'll go through those in a bit more detail. So first, on the language clarifications, we're clarifying the applicability section of the rule. We want to make sure that asbestos consultants who do work within the confines of the rule are covered. The previous language on applicability was fairly vague, specified owners and operators, but asbestos consultants have a fairly vital role in working on asbestos, and we wanted to make sure that they were covered. On surveys, we clarified that an on-site inspection of the project is required. The federal NESHAP requires a thorough inspection. They do not define what a thorough inspection is, but we have always interpreted that as requiring an on-site inspection of the facility to assess asbestos. And then on notification, our notifications are all online. We've had an electronic notification for asbestos for the last several years, so we wanted to address and remove the language that referred to written notification requirements, and then also added some provisions for phone notification in the event that our online system is down. On sampling, we needed to specify the minimum sample requirements for both friable and non-friable materials. That wasn't very clear in our existing rule. We've clarified that now, and we refer to ASTM standards that are accepted for sampling asbestos. And then we also added a separate provision allowing for less sampling for non-friable materials in small areas. What that was is in direct response to stakeholder concern that if they're renovating a bathroom or some other similar small area and there's some tile that they need to take some sample of to see if it's asbestos containing or not, if they had to take 3 samples, they might not be able to take those samples in spots that could be hidden if it turns out that that tile isn't asbestos containing and can be preserved. And so that issue seemed to make some sense to us, and so we made some, provided some flexibility there. And then also for sample analysis, the type of analysis that needs to be undertaken to determine asbestos, we wanted to establish a minimum standard for that and make sure that everybody was clear on that particular issue. So now I'll talk about some of the modifications and changes that we've made. Definition of emergency renovation. So one change that we wanted to make for ourselves was the requirement of an emergency declaration letter and a certification requirement associated with that. And the reason we wanted to make that change is that we've had experienced a lot of fraud in that area where some consultants, every single asbestos job they were doing, they were classifying as an emergency so they could get out from under the notification period. So we added this certification provision just as an additional level to make sure that folks are aware that there's some consequences if you are classifying something as an emergency and it's not actually the case. We also changed our definition of emergency to include the discovery of unknown, damaged, or disturbed asbestos-containing material. And that was in response to stakeholders who were saying, well, sometimes, I go into a job, I don't know I've got asbestos, or I find out later that it's asbestos and it's in bad shape, and then I've got a hole in the ground, and I don't want to have to wait for 10 days while I notify you and go through the regular notification process. And so we're now including that in our definition of emergency. So in that case, you open up you dig, you find asbestos, it's in damaged condition, you can call us, but you can then proceed with cleaning up the job and not have to wait those 10 days. We also changed the definition of emergency to allow for a call and go notification to us when there's an emergency that causes an imminent threat to public health or safety. And so that was the case where there's massive utility outage, there's a water main that blows up, and there's some great disruption. Again, it didn't make sense to have to notify us and then wait for our approval before proceeding with the job. We want folks to be able to notify us because we want to know what's going on, but you can go ahead and take care of what you need to do. You don't have to wait for district approval. We also made some changes on the types of personnel who can perform surveys. Our existing rule language requires that a certified asbestos consultant has to perform those surveys. We're now changing that to allow for AHERA-trained building inspectors. That's a lesser training standard than what's required for certified asbestos consultants. And that change was made again in response to stakeholder concerns that they employ some building inspectors, and those building inspectors should be qualified to be able to assess asbestos. We verified that with Cal OSHA as they set the standards for training and certification on asbestos workers, and they confirmed that allowing AHERA-trained building inspectors to do this work was sufficient. So there are a number of remaining concerns, and you'll hear about that in our public comments, but the concerns really focus on buried underground pipe. And so there's some cases where cementatious pipe contains asbestos. When that pipe contains asbestos, it can have a fairly high asbestos content, so it could be something like 30 or 40% asbestos. So we're hearing a lot about the need for separate procedures for buried underground pipe for utility workers. The concern is that underground pipe, it's underground, so perhaps unlike buildings, you're not getting as much risk of exposure when that pipe is dug up or if there's work being performed on it. There's also some concerns around the survey requirement for underground pipe. I mentioned before, surveys are a fundamental block of asbestos work, and that's a NESHAP requirement, but we're hearing a lot of comments that this, we should not require surveys prior to starting work on underground pipe. We're also hearing a lot of concerns about notification and any delays for review for work plans for cleaning up underground pipe. So our current rule requires that if you have underground pipe that contains asbestos and it's in damaged or disturbed condition, you have to notify the district, and then you have to wait for us to approve your cleanup plan. It's called a Procedure 5. We're hearing a lot of concerns about that, and the folks who want to be able to just go ahead and do the work and not wait for district approval. And then finally, we're hearing concerns about the qualification for surveys. A lot of the utility districts are asking that we allow folks who have AC pipe work certification to be able to do surveys for underground pipe. That certification is a 4-hour training versus the O'Hara certification, which is a 24-hour training. Again, we have discussed that with Cal OSHA, and they don't believe that that's sufficient to be able to identify and assess asbestos. But we did provide a number of flexibilities for underground pipe. We've worked a lot with stakeholders to try to address their concerns. So one of the flexibilities we added is a lesser notification period for work that's happening in remote locations. So if you're more than a quarter mile away from the next receptor, you can just proceed with a 2-day notification. And that made some sense to us because if you're that far away from a receptor, the risk of exposure is obviously much less. We are taking a little risk with this type of work because the NESHAP arguably requires 10-day notification in all cases, but we think we can square this away. We also wanted to clarify that almost most underground pipe work that's conducted is subject to what we call a Procedure 3. And a Procedure 3 just makes sure that you go down, you work on the pipe, you keep it adequately wet. You don't have to have advanced district approval in order to do that work. And so that's work where you're cutting into the pipe, but you're not using power tools, which is usually what you do when you cut in to install a valve, for example. So if the pipe is in good condition, no power tools are used, you can use a Procedure 3, which should greatly simplify a lot of the cases when work needs to happen on those pipes. And then, again, we have done a lot of work on our emergency provisions that we believe in actuality will address most of the remaining concerns about folks being able to proceed with work and not have delays associated with the district approval. So again, in terms of the impact of our proposed changes, we are not adding any substantive requirements. To the extent we are making some changes, we are either clarifying provisions that are currently ambiguous and causing problems, or we're adding flexibilities and providing avenues for regulatory relief, because we want to be able to make sure that we don't stand in the way of work being done when there's emergencies or when there's a need to be able to move quickly, but at the same time we want to make sure that work is conducted in a way that's protective of human health and the environment. So I was going to talk about our next steps in terms of going to set hearing next month and then public hearing. This week we've received a number of letters asking us to continue to delay this rule. We think it's important to be able to work with stakeholders and make sure that they understand both the existing requirements of the rule as well as how some of the proposed changes that we've developed will be able to help them and address their concerns. So at this point, we are seeking to continue to delay this rule and be able to take the time to work with those stakeholders. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Very good. Do my board members have any questions before we take public comment on this?
I have a question, but I'll wait till we hear the public comment.
All right.
So I can.
All right, Joe, want to go ahead and start public?
Sure. The first speaker would be Greg Wolf, and then after Greg would be Bill Gedney. So if you can come to the microphone here, and we'll have them time limit. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Some of them are coming over from the overflow room, so they're not here yet. I'll put them back in the queue when they come in. How about Jim Leach?
Bill Gedney, too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bill, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Gedney. I'm the Vice President of Environmental Quality for Golden State Water Company. We represent 37 systems across California, serve approximately 1 million Californians. We've worked through this process with a number of utilities. Many of them are here today, and you'll hear from them as well as with district staff. We appreciate the opportunity to comment. We'd like the Cal OSHA training and certification for asbestos cement pipe to be considered in the rule. This certification is the most appropriate for the materials we work on, while the certification required by the proposed rule is not applicable to AC pipe and will not make it safer for anyone. The AHERA training results and that training, in fact, are not consistent with repeated studies performed by the American Water Works Association relative to asbestos fibers. We believe the rule is important and want to continue working with staff to make sure we get it right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Greg Wolf, you're next, followed by Jim Leach, and then Frank Kowaliak.
And we're on a 1 minute clock, right?
Yes.
Okay. Anytime.
Go ahead and start.
To ensure the consistent interpretation and enforcement of the rule without overregulation, it's important to continue the rulemaking effort, the good work that's been done so far. The current rule in this form does not address some of the Buried Utility Coalition issues that have been addressed to the staff. However, I think we've been working through them with staff, and I think there are some areas of overlap where we can reach agreement. Specifically, part of the rule is dealing with training. We talked about, Sarah talked about that in terms of rule development. There are requirements already for AC pipe workers, and their requirements are dictated by Cal OSHA as well as EPA. Both those agencies, which require this floor that has been discussed, have already set precedent in dealing with AC pipe in a separate manner from other asbestos-containing materials. In addition, finally, asphalt has become kind of a hot issue, and I think that there's an advocacy group for an ad hoc asphalt study group. We support that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Leach here?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, committee members, staff. I'm Jim Leach, representing the Santa Margarita Water District, and I'm also a member of the Buried Utilities Coalition. We appreciate the discussions that we've had with the district regarding the rules, and we believe that progress has been made. We have some remaining issues, as you'll hear discussed, that can be resolved, we think, if given the opportunity to continue working with the staff. Specifically regarding the surveys, we believe it's appropriate that we use our as-built records to identify buried utilities, known asbestos work. In these instances, requiring an on-site survey is probably unnecessary and not a good use of time or ratepayer dollars. We think it's also appropriate for our trained field personnel to presume the presence of asbestos for buried utilities work or known asbestos cement transite pipe and utilize our Cal OSHA trained asbestos cement pipe craft workers for the surveys. We appreciate very much the recommendation for additional time to work with staff to address our concerns. We want to thank you very much for the amendments that have been proposed so far. Thank you for consideration.
Okay, Frank Kowaliak, followed by David Rothbard, and then Allison Torres.
Morning, my name is Frank Priwaznik. I'm with the Ergon Ranch Water District. We'd like to thank your staff for listening to the concerns of the utility community and for addressing a number of those concerns in the current version of the proposed amendments to Rule 1403. We ask that AQMD please look at the current draft of the amendments with fresh eyes and ensure that the applicability of the rule is clear before the final version is adopted. We ask that the requirements regarding the survey be clarified for cases when there is no asbestos in the area. We'd like to see amendments to Rule 1403 move forward, but a bit more work on the rule is needed before final adoption. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Rothbard.
Good morning, I'm David Rothbart, and I represent the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works as the Air Quality Committee Chair. I'm also a member of South Coast Local Government and Small Business Assistance Advisory Group. Last week, local government received the same presentation you just listened to and took public comment from many of the same stakeholders. In response, local governments unanimously recommended that staff should work with stakeholders to resolve outstanding issues and to form a working group to address the evolving asphalt issue. As a stakeholder, I'm certain there's a compromise that can be reached that will keep our workers and the public safe while allowing routine maintenance activities on essential public services to proceed without needless delay. Please direct staff to work with stakeholders on the proposed amended rule and to provide flexibility that allows essential public services to efficiently maintain their infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Allison Torres is next, and then after that would be Steve Jepson and Stacy Taylor.
Good morning, my name is Allison Torres with Eastern Municipal Water District, and we're also a SCAP member. My agency operates and maintains essential public services comprised of approximately 4,500 miles of pipelines, and we're committed to the safety and of our employees, contractors, and the public we serve. I'm here today to provide some perspective to the survey requirements in PAR 1403. I'll do so by a brief example. What does PAR 1403 require for a new water service connection to an existing plastic water main? I wish the answer was simple, however it is not. Prior to performing the work, the following must occur: an on-site visual inspection by a state-certified asbestos consultant or a HERA-trained building inspector that must be documented, and it may require asphalt sampling. The end result is the same as the start. The pipe is plastic, and there's no disturbance of asbestos. These requirements result in inefficiency and delays with no added environmental benefits. This rulemaking has clearly identified key issues with the existing and proposed rule, and we request that staff work with stakeholders to allow essential public services to operate their systems without burdensome requirements. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Jepson, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Steve Jepson, Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works, or SCAP. SCAP represents 83 public wastewater and water agencies in Southern California. Our SCAP members are in compliance with the current rule and Cal-OSHA asbestos requirements, and we take worker and public safety very seriously. Based on multiple meetings with South Coast AQMD enforcement and rulemaking staff, there's a common misunderstanding on all sides of what's required by Rule 1403. We don't agree that there's widespread non-compliance, but do agree that the rule needs to be amended to clarify what is required. We greatly appreciate the call and go process contained in the proposed amended rule, but more work is needed to allow routine maintenance activities on essential public services to allow us to proceed without needless delays. We believe that the amended rule can be crafted in a manner that will allow us to do our job efficiently while protecting human health and the environment. We ask the Stationary Source Committee to direct staff to work with stakeholders to address these last remaining issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Stacy Taylor, and will be followed by Rick Olson and then John Sanks. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Stacy Taylor of Mesa Water District. I also represent the Buried Utilities Coalition with over 100 members, mostly water and wastewater agencies as essential public service providers throughout the South Coast Air Basin. You've heard from many coalition members today because we share the district's concern and prioritization of safety. We also want to do our work efficiently, economically, and effectively. Our existing procedures are compliant with the rule and fully protect the workers and the public. I want to share that a recent study took air samples while bursting non-friable asbestos cement transite pipe. No asbestos was detected while using our wetting and cutting procedures, which are standard for buried utilities work on this material, showing no asbestos exposure threat to workers or the public. We appreciate the addition of call and go and the emergency provisions, and they are very helpful to the rule, so thank you to the district. We also appreciate the opportunity to continue working with staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rick Olson, please.
Good morning, Rick Olson, Operations Superintendent, El Toro Water District, member of the Buried Utilities Coalition. I first want to thank staff for their willingness to work with us on this issue for the amendments to Rule 1403. Getting out of breath running. We want to very much support the amendments to the rule that make the rule much clearer and workable for the BUC. Additional efforts in a few areas within the rule would make the rule more applicable to the BUC and better protect essential public service. One such item is the requirement, to use a certified asbestos consultant or an HERA-trained professional for the surveys, both building industry trainings. Neither of these are relevant to the buried asbestos cement transite pipe. Cal-OSHA's approved asbestos cement pipe worker training is specific to asbestos cement transite pipe and has proven to sufficiently protect workers and the public from exposure. We appreciate the opportunity to continue to work on this.
Thank you. The next speaker is
Thank
John
you.
Sanks, and after Mr. Sanks would be Peter Winningham and Charles Buslinger.
Good morning, my name is John Sanks with Anaheim Public Utilities, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on Rule 1403. We support AQMD's objective to add clarity to the rule and appreciate the opportunity to participate in the many stakeholder meetings. We agree with the comments made by the Buried Utility Coalition in their letter and look forward to reviewing their response to these comments. And we reiterate our comments provided in the letter dated November 13th, 2018. We believe there's still opportunity to streamline the rule and would appreciate if AQMD would consider allowing trained water utility workers to repair damaged asbestos cement pipe less than 100 square feet without requiring special notifications or work plan approval by AQMD. These workers receive specialized Cal OSHA approved training specific to asbestos cement pipe annually. Because the work process for repairing this damaged pipe is already established through this training, we believe developing site-specific work procedures on a case-by-case basis using Procedure 5 plans is unnecessary because they merely restate existing work practices. Implementing this change would require only minimal adjustments to the rule language. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Peter Whittingham.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commission members, committee members. Peter Whittingham on behalf of the Buried Utilities Coalition. We have been working with the district since the first of the year and have had a number of meetings and dialogue, including most recently a meeting on August 29th. The Buried Utilities Coalition did submit a letter about a week prior to that meeting, and we are awaiting a response from staff on that. We appreciate very much staff's willingness to continue this process, not go forward with setting the rule hearing for November, and continue to work with us to resolve these issues. The district reopened this rule for a very specific purpose, to provide clarifications. As the district staff has mentioned, there's confusion about the rule amongst the regulated community, and buried utilities have experienced instances of inconsistent enforcement of the rule. We feel it's very important to continue to build on the buried utilities and staff's progress on 1403 to ensure the consistent application and enforcement of the rule with an acknowledgement of the mission, track record, and professional approach of the essential public utilities. Neither the current nor the amended rule recognizes that the buried utilities are the good actors. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Charles Buslinger, and he'll be followed by Gabriel Demas-Smith and Jake Wollebrecht.
Hi, I'm Charles Buslinger with the Municipal Water District of Orange County. Wanted to reiterate, I'm also with the Buried Utilities Coalition, wanted to reiterate what some of the previous speakers have also said and urge the board here to direct staff to continue to work with stakeholders to provide flexibility while maintaining worker and public health and safety. We think that this, we've gone so far, it's a good step in the right direction. We just don't think it's quite baked yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gabriel?
Good morning, board members, committee members, and staff. My name is Gabriel Demas-Smith, and I'm with the California Association of Mutual Water Companies. Cal Mutuals represents mutual water companies across the state of California in LA County, Orange County, and San Bernardino County. The proposed amendments to Rule 1403 create extra regulatory requirements which increase the cost, affecting our ability to continue to provide safe and affordable drinking water to our communities. Given the passage of SB 200, AQMD should be prepared to provide technical and financial assistance for water suppliers serving disadvantaged communities and complying with its regulations. We respectfully urge AQMD to be more thoughtful on the impact of small systems and disadvantaged communities when proposing new regulations. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jake Wollebrecht, and he'll be followed by Ken Barker and Priscilla Hamilton.
Good morning, honorable committee members and district staff. My name is Jake Wollebrecht. I serve as the Director of Regional and Legal Affairs for Molten Miguel Water District. We're a public water agency that serves 6 cities within South Coast's jurisdiction. And I'm here with an additional comment on behalf of the Buried Utilities Coalition. I'd like to request more time to work with district staff to make corrections to the rule and allow essential public utilities to perform our work safely and efficiently. Asbestos cement transite pipe work on small jobs of less than 100 square feet in particular. They comply with the NESHAP requirements that we currently follow, and they provide sufficient protection for the public and our workers. There's no scientific basis or public health threat that justifies going beyond NESHAP in this area, on asbestos cement transite pipe work, and we would appreciate the opportunity to work with staff to fix the rule so that it's less burdensome and costly for essential public services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Ken Barker.
Good afternoon. I'm Ken Barker with Sully Miller Contracting Company. The last time I was addressing this committee was back in 2004, and at that time you were working on the Rule 1157, which addressed aggregate plants, asphalt plants, and ready-mix plants. When I hear asphalt being used in the same sentence as asbestos, I get uncomfortable. Our core business is asphalt manufacturing and milling. Currently, the rule is unclear on how to handle asphalt pavement. Version 1, asphalt should not be considered a suspect ACM. Version 2, asphalt should be sampled and analyzed. Also, we need to learn what is the extent of any asphalt contamination and the best way for mitigation. We want to be part of any ad hoc working group or any other committee that would be working on how to handle asphalt pavement. Thank you. We want to contribute to a solution.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Priscilla Hamilton, and after Priscilla will be Michael Friend and Cindy Parsons.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Hamilton, and I'm an Environmental Affairs Manager with SoCalGas. We've been working with AQMD over the past year and a half on this rule. This is an important rule, and we appreciate the progress made. I'm here today to talk about the asphalt sampling policy being implemented as part of the rule that assumes all asphalt contains asbestos. It's based on 2 data points, and it will cost SoCalGas up to $140 million a year for the 100 routine jobs we do a day. We need transparency, and cities and counties who work in the streets to be involved. We would support forming an ad hoc working group that is held accountable to the board to develop an asphalt policy based on robust data that's developed in a transparent manner and will include input from cities and counties and other stakeholders who work in the street every day as well. We are hopeful and confident that we can continue to work with staff on this issue and other key issues, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Friend, please. There you go. Timing.
Hello. Good morning, committee members. I'm Michael Friend with the Association of California Cities, Orange County, representing the interests of all Orange County cities and affiliated organizations. In addition to our 23 members, ACCOC represents 54 affiliate members, including essential public service utilities, nonprofits, private sector businesses, and transportation agencies. As part of the Buried Utilities Coalition, ACCOC and its 77 members share the concerns expressed by the coalition regarding PAR 1403. While we appreciate some good progress on the rule amendments, we respectfully request more time for the Buried Utilities Coalition to work with district staff to find solutions for the remaining issues that our members are expressing here today. ACCOC supports the formation of an ad hoc asphalt study group to include all impacted stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Cindy Parsons is next, and then the last 2 cards that I have are for Tammy Yamasaki and Timothy Miller. Anybody else wants to put a card in, now would be the time.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Cindy Parsons with Los Angeles Department of Water, Power, and Environmental Affairs. Very briefly, we support the rule changes that facilitate emergency work. Now, those changes are very important to protect public health and safety. Those include call and go and the expanded definition of emergency renovation. So we really appreciate those changes. We're looking at this rule from an implementation perspective and how we make it work. We did submit a letter yesterday with additional recommended changes to streamline the compliance for operational efficiency and to reduce the administrative burden for work on underground utility infrastructure. And we appreciate the opportunity to continue working to get this rule right so that it works for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tammy Yamasaki.
Good
morning. My name is Tammy Yamasaki. I'm with Southern California Edison. SCE especially appreciates that AQMD staff was able to come up with the call and go procedure and clarification around emergencies, which would allow for the fastest restoration of essential public services while still protecting public health. The one issue I'm still unclear about is how to handle asphalt. Staff has made it clear in previous presentations that asphalt being considered a suspect ACM is technically not part of Rule 1403, but because of how often asphalt is touched through regular course of business, not only for utilities, I think the issue deserves a thorough investigation to figure out if asphalt is a genuine risk to public health or if the scope of asbestos use in asphalt can be definitively narrowed. SCE supports the idea of an ad hoc working group for asphalt and would be more than happy to participate to come up with a clear, feasible procedures that would still protect public health. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Timothy Miller.
Hello, Tim Miller, Director of Water Quality and Environmental Compliance for California American Water. As the successor agency to Orange County Air Pollution Control District, whose lawsuit against the Public Utilities Commission spawned the concept of concurrent jurisdiction, it is ironic that we're here today to discuss our concerns about how Rule 1403 may conflict with or interfere with water utility obligations under other state laws. California American Water shares the commitment of our other water utilities and district staff to safety and protecting the environment. We also share the concerns of some of the other water utilities, of which I will cover only two. First, we remain concerned that staff statements and interpretations regarding what constitutes a hazardous situation that poses an imminent threat to public health and safety is not clear. Second, we are concerned that the additions of language regarding damaged and disturbed ACM may conflict with our obligations under Article 10, Section 2 of the California Constitution regarding the waste and unreasonable use of water, as well as recently enacted water loss performance laws when those leaks do not pose an imminent threat to public health and safety. We look forward to working with the staff.
That's it for the public comments here, sir.
Very good. Senator Delgado, you had a comment?
I was wondering if I could make a comment out of Supervisor Perez's office, please.
I'm sorry, is that a public comment?
Yes, sir.
Sure. Sorry, Supervisor. Senator. Go ahead.
I'm Ron Alexander, and I want to thank the opportunity to speak with the topic on behalf of Coachella Valley Water District. We support the BUC's effort in regards to PAR 1403. We want to support amendments to PAR 1403 that will provide clear and workable regulations, but not at the expense of imposing requirements that would significantly impact our critical services with no public benefit. We understand comments from staff of AQMD is considering pulling the rule if there's too much opposition from the regulated community. This would be counterproductive as we believe the district reopened the rule for specific purposes of providing clarification. The public we all serve expects us to work together for their best interests and responsible and fiscal. Thank you again for the time to express these concerning issues and look forward to working together as stewards of the public.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, is there any other public comment in any other remote locations on this item? All right, now Senator Delgado, sorry about that.
Yeah, so thank you. So I just want to have full disclosure that I likely will have to seek the same permit or approval or follow this rule as I go through my day business. But so I have a unique perspective as it comes to some of these refinements. I do want to thank staff for some of the work, but I think what we're hearing from stakeholders is that the underground pipe testing and procedures is unique to what an above ground structure is. A lot of times things happen in the field that you don't expect. Everything that I heard today about the as-built surveys as a basis for determining if there's a certain procedure to making sure that more people can be certified if they're working on pipes through a new standard, those all sound very reasonable. For those of us who have to deal with these situations in the field, that testimony always sounded very reasonable. And I'd urge the continued work with our staff to find a compromise with these, with the underground pipe situation. It's not quite like an above ground structure. So there needs to be some understanding of the challenges posed with working in those environments. Certainly, having to stop work and then submit a work plan for our staff to go out and survey, that sounds extremely just not workable. So I'd love to, be a part of the continued discussion. I want to make sure, obviously, first and foremost, that we are keeping the health of the workers in mind, first and foremost, and the public. But barring any immediate health threat, I would encourage us to look closely at some of these compromise scenarios. I did have a question. I didn't quite understand the asphalt. We didn't hear anything in the presentation about the asphalt. Do you mind giving us a little bit more context to that?
Sure. So asphalt is actually not a part of this rulemaking or anything that we're doing with the amendments. But what happened is in the course of this rulemaking, coincidentally, we became aware that there were some issues with or some incidents of asbestos in asphalt. And so that was raised to us by one municipality who said that we know there's an area of streets where this asphalt contains asbestos, and so we surveyed and we treat it appropriately. Since that time, we've been requiring some sampling of asphalt during work, and we have confirmed that there was another instance in West Hollywood where a parking lot tested positive for asbestos. So we do know that there's areas of the country where asbestos was added to asphalt. It's usually added to make it stronger. It's no longer current practice, but it was a historic practice. So there are other areas of the country that have been dealing with this issue and figuring out how to move through. We're still in the data collection mode of trying to assess how big of a problem this is and then how we need to proceed. But it's an issue that's still developing, and we're collecting information to figure out how to deal with it. But there's no change in the rule language that raised this. It's just that we became aware that a material that we had not previously considered as suspect for asbestos now may have it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'd never heard of asbestos in asphalt, so thank you for that.
Any other board member questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Please.
So a number of the commenters have commented that there's a Cal OSHA rule that covers the certification of the asbestos inspectors. I'd like to ask staff whether they've reviewed that and investigated that.
So we have been discussing this with Cal OSHA because we had heard initially from our stakeholders concerns of, well, do you just have to have a certified asbestos consultant do the survey? Are there other categories of professionals who can do that survey requirement? And so working with Cal OSHA, that's why we were able to come up with language allowing for the AHERA-trained building inspectors, because AHERA certification is a 24-hour certification versus the training you would have to go to get a CAC license. The asbestos cement pipe worker training is a 4-hour training, and it's training for those individuals to be able to work on the pipe. But asbestos surveying requires identification of materials, and it could be materials besides asbestos pipe involved, and then also assessing the condition, whether it's damaged, disturbed, to the extent that it's damaged and disturbed, and what kind of work would need to be then take care of to address the situation. So from talking to Cal OSHA, their claim is that they were comfortable with the AHERA-trained inspections, but that the 4-hour AC pipe worker training was not deemed sufficient.
Do you think, Sarah, it's possible then to sort of synchronize the rule that we develop with the Cal OSHA separate requirements for the different types of inspection?
We can certainly continue to work with Cal OSHA on that. We want to make sure that the folks who are doing the surveys are qualified enough to not only be able to identify the variety of materials that could be present, that could be containing asbestos, but as well as appropriately assess condition.
The other item that came up was the small jobs exemption. I understand you do have some kind of an exemption in the rule, but what is the issue with that?
Yeah, so we both the NESHAP and our rule have a de minimis level with which the rule applies. We are more stringent than the NESHAP. So the NESHAP allows for an exemption for jobs underneath the 200 linear square foot or linear foot over a year. Our rule is 100 square foot, so it's a different metric, and it's a little bit more stringent. So we have heard, as you heard today, many concerns from stakeholders on being able to do small jobs on a routine basis and not have to be part of this rulemaking. Again, our limit has always been more stringent in our rule, and we believe that there's enough concern about potential exposure of asbestos that we want those jobs to follow our procedures.
The other thing that, what we've heard from almost everybody is that they want more time on the rule. So is the November hearing date too soon? Do we need to extend this out?
Yeah, I think we do.
Mayor Mitchell, I was just going to say, we're going to request to pull this item, and so the November date is too soon. What we'd like to do is come back to this committee. Realistically, I would say after the first of the year. It's right in the holiday time. You've got a lot of other things that are going. I think we can come back, try to work on these issue of harmonizing with Cal OSHA, understanding where the NESHAPs are, and continuing to work with the stakeholders.
Good. I would recommend that as well. I mean, we're dealing here too with essential public services, a lot of water districts, a lot of water purveyors, water providers, and that's who we've heard from this morning, a lot of those people. So I do think there's a lot more work to be done on this, and that it's a good idea to pull it and keep working on it and work out some of the problems that present themselves when you need to address an issue quickly because you're dealing with essential public services. So I think there's no motion required on this, but I would recommend that our staff just keep working on this to work out all these little nuances that have come up as you have prepared the rule.
I would agree.
Just one question, if I might, on the certification for pipe workers to be able to kind of survey. Is it possible? This is a question to staff. If you could take it back to OSHA, to maybe add an hour to that 4-hour certification or whatever they recommend, so that people can be qualified to do this. That would be where I would want to take it, that the question be asked, not does it qualify currently, the current training, but what can be added, an hour, this curriculum, so that people could be certified. Those are the kind of questions I'd hope we could continue to move forward.
We can take that back, thank you.
Very good. Supervisor Rutherford, do you have any other comments, or not seeing anybody else? All right, that brings us to our 2 written reports, which are attached. Anyone have any questions on those? Any more board members have any other business? Do we have any general public comment?
Anyone with general public comment? None here in CCA.
All right, any other general public comment, any other remote locations?
None here.
Very good. All right, that brings us to our next meeting. Will be October 18th at 10:30. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the commenters. They did a very good job, and sorry we had to go down to 1 minute, but we do need to be done by 12 o'clock, and we did accomplish that, so thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.
Have a nice weekend.